Take your Bibles when you're ready to go and turn them to Ecclesiastes 2. We are going to be in chapter 4, but turn to chapter 2. And we are going to stay in Ecclesiastes, although I was told at the young couples activity on Friday night that there was plenty more material for me to be preaching on Family Talk. And they're submitting all of this, the ladies are submitting all of their sermons for more Family Talk. I said, we're just taking a temporary pause. We'll be back to Family Talk. But that's where all those messages came from. Either my wife wrote them or other ladies in the church. They were slipped under the office door. And I knew who they were written by because a lot of the husbands' names were erased out, and it would just say husband. But Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Solomon used the word vanity 28 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. And because of that, this emphasis on vanity, it has been easy to see for any reader. And as a result, as I've mentioned, this book is easily misunderstood to be a depressing book, a pessimistic book written by a broken, bitter man. But having read the book a number of times and now studying it, there is another word that is a counterbalance to the heavy use of the word vanity. That's used 28 times. There's another word that's used 21 times that really does counter that word, and the word is better. Better. And that word speaks of a positive, right? When you say something's better, or I found something better, or you're going to be better, however you use that word, it always directs you to the upside, to the good side, to the positive side. You may be at the very bottom, but when someone says there's something better, you're always thinking of up, of positive. And so it really does counter that heavy use of the word vanity. Solomon used the word better very often throughout each of his three biblical literary works. He used it a lot in the book of Proverbs. He would say things like this in chapter 15, verse 16 of Proverbs. He'd say, better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. He would say, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. He would write, better is a little with righteousness than great revenues without right. He would write, he that is slow to wrath or slow to anger is better than the mighty. And guys use this when it's hunting season, but Solomon did say it is better to dwell in the wilderness. No guy's going to quote it. All right. Then with a contentious and angry woman. Chapter 27, verse 5, open rebuke is better than secret love. Yeah, ladies, know your Bible. If he has a sign on the garage that just says Proverbs 21:19, but you know what that reference is? That's not a good thing. Better. Song of Solomon 4:10. Lighten up, please. Lighten up. So sensitive. How fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse? How much better is thy love than wine? And that's a good one to quote as well, Song of Solomon 4:10. But he used the word better often. We see it here in chapter 2, verse 24. Read with me. This is the end of chapter 2. He's concluding the chapter. He says a few things, and he says in verse 24, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. Now jump over to chapter 3, where we finished last time we were in Ecclesiastes, and he concludes that chapter in verse 22 by saying, wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? And so we're going to see going throughout the rest of Ecclesiastes that word is going to show up 19 more times. And in chapter 4, he starts to really rev the engine of betterness, of better things, of something that is better, or someone who is better. And as we read through chapter 4, you may not be first convinced that it's a positive, upbeat book, that it's a book that really points you to the good things in life, because it does sound a little grim at first. But bear with me, because the overwhelming theme of chapter 4 is definitely about being better. Listen, life is vain. Life is not fulfilling. Life is not satisfying. Life is hard. We're going to read about that in just a moment. But there are better things in life. And the more you choose the better things, the better life will get. And so it's about looking for the better side of life. Or you can sit there and focus on the vanity of life, and life won't seem very good. But if you find the better things, and if you focus on those things that are better, it'll work out all right. And we're going to start in verse number 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And in many ways, what Solomon's about to write is that ignorance is bliss in some ways. Verse number 1, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, "So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun." So I returned. This is a phrase we'll see him use. That's him getting back to what he was talking about, getting back to his investigation in life, getting back to looking at things in life and making observations. So I returned. Anyways, back to what I was saying. I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors, there was power. But they, those who were oppressed, had no comforter. So, like I said, it's not going to seem right out of the gate that this is a very positive message. He says, I looked at everything. Because remember in chapter 1, verse 13 and verse 14, it says, hey, I've seen everything. I set out to look at all things that are done under the sun, and I've seen it all. And he says, I have seen many oppressed. I've seen many oppressed, and I've seen that they don't have a comforter. And the ones that are oppressing, there's power there. But the ones who are oppressed, there's no comforter. Solomon has seen it all. He's seen much oppression under the sun. He's seen the pain in this world. He saw the good guys getting beaten by the bad guys. He's seen the powerful people oppress and control the little people. He saw sorrow. He saw inconsolable sorrow. And he saw lots of countries who had kings who weren't like him, who ruled with an iron fist, who kept people under their thumb, who dictated their lives. He saw oppression. He saw lots and lots of injustice. And he couldn't deny that. And I appreciated that about Solomon. And you have to do what we've been going through. You have to stop and appreciate what he's writing. Just don't take what he says as an instant, wow, this guy's really a bummer. He's a real pessimist. Just stop and realize he's seen everything. And if he told us only about the good things, if he told us only about the positive things, if he colored the world like he was looking through rose-colored glasses, would he not be doing the reader an injustice? If he told his son in particular, hey, buddy, life is grand. Life is wonderful. Oh, I've seen it all. They make cars out of gumdrops. You go to work and you get to drink pop and soda the whole time. You get a root beer float, whatever you win. And by the way, you'll always win. And no one's going to be mean. And there aren't bullies. And if there are, we'll tell them they can't do that. And they just paint this fluffy world. Would he not be doing an injustice to his reader, to his children? Yeah, which is kind of what's happening today. We tell our kids, kids, life is grand. There's so much opportunity for you. And everyone's going to treat you well. And if they don't, we're going to put them in ice, and we'll make sure the walls don't hurt, and we'll make sure everyone gets a trophy. And you're setting these kids up for epic failure. You are setting these kids up to view the world in such a way that they're going to be crushed when it doesn't work out that way. And so you may at first say, Solomon's a bummer here. No. He's just making sure he tells you everything there is to know, which you're going to find out is a blessing. So hang in there. But this guy knew a lot about oppression. In fact, he wrote a lot about it in the book of Proverbs. He told his son in chapter 3 of that book, envy thou not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. He wrote in verse 31 of chapter 14, he that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker. He talks about the person who oppresses the poor to increase his riches will surely come to want in chapter 22. In that same chapter, Solomon tells his reader, rob not the poor because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. He describes a poor man that oppresseth the poor as a sweeping rain, which leaveth no food. And he says, a prince who lacks understanding is a great oppressor. That's in chapter 28. I point that out to let you know that what we're reading in chapter 4 here of Ecclesiastes is not some new revelation that he, as an older man, realized. He didn't just come to the revelation, the realization that, look at all these people that are oppressed. I don't like this world. It's all vain. It's all terrible. No, he knew about oppression as a young man. He's just coming back to it now as an older man. He was always well aware of it. He didn't like it. So in verse 2, let's see what he says. Wherefore, in light of this, I praised the dead, which are already dead, more than the living, which are yet alive. Rough day. Now, he's not worshiping the dead. You understand that when he says, I praise the dead more than they which are living. That's not any worship. But in light of, in the context of those who are oppressed and those who have no comforter because they're oppressed, he says the dead are better off than the living. And again, the context is the oppression in life under the sun. He's not at all taking into account the afterlife. Because the oppression that takes place in the underworld, in the afterlife, makes the oppression in this world look easy peasy. So he's not even referring to hell. He's not taking that into account. He's not worshiping anyone. He's just saying, listen, the people who are dead, they've already dealt with it. They're now at rest from it. They don't have to worry about the Hitlers of the world. They don't have to worry about the Stalins of the world. No longer does the servant have to be subject to the master. No longer does the employee have to be subject to the cruel employer. No longer are dictators hurting you when you're dead. You're done with the oppressions of the cruel. All right, verse 3. Yea, better is he than both they. So both the dead and the living, there's someone better. Who is that? It's the person which hath not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Give me a few minutes to explain this. Because you're thinking, wow, this guy had a bad day, right? You're saying the person who hasn't been born is better than the living and better than the dead, meaning he's saying it's just better not to even be around. It's better not to even exist. It's better not to become a part of this world. And so, number one of 4 things in this chapter that are better is the womb than the world. And that's because in the context, before you enter this life, you have no knowledge of evil. Keep that in mind. You have no knowledge of evil people. You have no knowledge of cruel people. You have no knowledge of wicked people. You have no knowledge, no experience. You're not acquainted with any oppression. And so he says the unborn from that standpoint is better than the living because they will never have to endure oppression. And they're certainly better than the dead because they never had to experience oppression. What was Solomon being here? He was being very realistic. Turn to Job chapter 3. This is a realistic man who is exposing the pain of this world to his readers. This deep-thinking observer who sat back and observed life, and he observed countries, he observed the powerful, he observed leaders, and he realized that there are some mean people, there are some cruel people, and then there are some victims in this world who are subject to these evil people. How do I deal with that? How do I reconcile that? How do I accept that this world is full of cruel people who hurt other people? And in fact, many of them are innocent. Many of them are righteous. His thought process is very sound. There's nothing wrong with his thought process. How many of you think Job is a great man? Yeah, Job was a fantastic man. He was upright. He eschewed evil. He walked with God. He knew God very well. Certainly throughout his trial, it did expose some self-righteousness. But you and I would have been exposed a lot sooner given what he went through. But what he says in chapter 3 is right at the time for him to feel this way. We're going to read a little bit, so let's go right after it. Chapter 3, verse number 1. We see Job opening his mouth and cursing his day. What is that? That's his birthday. And he said, verse 3, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? Or why the breast that I should suck? For now should I have lain still and been quiet. I should have slept, then had I been at rest. With kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, or with princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver, or as in hidden untimely birth I had not been, as infants which never saw light. There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together. They hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. You see, he was cursing his birthday. He wished he never was born. He wished he didn't live to get to the point where he was at, where he felt oppressed, where he felt pain, where he felt sorrow, where he felt grief. He lost his children. He lost his health. He lost everything. And he went back and said, boy, why couldn't I just been not even born? Because there, I would never have to deal with what I'm dealing with. Job wasn't out of his mind, was he? Was he hurting? Oh, yeah. Was he sorrowful? For sure. You know, Jeremiah said essentially the same thing in chapter 20. He said, cursed be the day wherein I was born, and he went on a rant just like Job did. And he said in verse 18 of that chapter, wherefore came I forth out of the womb to see labor and sorrow. Why did I even come out and see this? Turn back to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. You see, Job said in his darkest hour the same things that Solomon said in his final hours. Jeremiah said in his brokenness the same things that Solomon said in his final hours. And if your life is good tonight, if it's hunky-dory tonight, then you probably can't appreciate what each of these men said at different points in their life. But if your life isn't so hunky-dory, if things aren't so peachy keen for you now or in the future, it will be very easy, very natural, and quite frankly, at times very appropriate to say, why did I even come into this world? Now, if I ask for a raise of hands, I bet you many of you have felt that at different points in your life. Because this world is tough. You don't have to lose your greatest asset. You don't have to lose your health to appreciate how difficult this world can be. Pastor, you're not encouraging us this evening. Hang on. The mindset that life is hard, that life is cruel, that life is unfair, that life will come with great grief, that life will come with oppression, that life will be difficult, is a mindset that if you don't have, inevitable oppression when it comes will crush you. Inevitable tragedy when it comes will crush you. If you're not in some ways expecting it, if you don't have a realistic grasp on what it is to live in this world, to live in the place we call earth that is cursed, that has thorns, that has darkness, that has weather you don't like, that has sin in it, then you're not going to get through life successfully. You will hate God, you will hate mankind. Solomon is putting out there the facts. And these facts are not complaints. They're intended to enlighten us. And the sooner we realize these sad truths, you ready for it? The better off we'll be. Life is hard, though, not because God made it this way, but because man chose it this way. You say, well, Solomon tells us it's better to be unborn than live in this world. I can't go be unborn, so what good is that to me? Solomon's pointing you back to where God intended life to be. He's pointing you back to the Garden of Eden. He's pointing you back to before time. He's pointing you back to before there was everything we know it to be. When God created us, He created us with harmony. Harmony. Not oppression, not sin, not cruelty, not victims, not criminals. He gave us harmony. But we chose sin. And as soon as we chose sin, immediately this world was cursed. Sin introduced to all of our relationships problems. And you and I experienced death and hardship as a result. You see, the unborn are better than the living. The unborn are better off than the dead because man made this world hard. But that was never God's intention. By declaring the unborn better than the living and the dead, Solomon was exposing the root problem in life. And the root problem in life is unavoidable unless you're never born. The root problem in life is living with sin. Living with sin. And what he's saying, get back to God's original intent. Because that's the only place it gets better. Well, I can't be unborn, Solomon, and I can't stop sinning, so how does that help me? Realize that God's plan is better than man's plan. Realize that God's intentions are better than our intentions. Yeah, I know you can't be unborn. I know you can't avoid oppression. I know you can't avoid sin. But choose God's way. Now think of Jesus Christ in this term. Was he better in heaven before he came to this earth? Or was he better on earth after he left heaven? Now, when I say better, I'm not referring to moral excellence or accomplishment. Was he better off in the glories of heaven, or is he better off here on this earth? Heaven. You know why? Because when he came here, the Bible says he became a man of sorrows. He became acquainted with grief. In heaven, there's no grief. There's no oppression. No one spits at him. No one beats him. No one crucifies him. No one puts thorns on his head. No one does those things in heaven. So he was better off there where there is no sin. Here in this world, doesn't matter who you are. You can be as clean as Christ. You can be as pure as Jesus Christ. In this world, people get oppressed. People hurt. We experience sorrow. Look at it again in verse 3. Yea, better is he than both they which hath not yet been, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Now, this is a fact, and if you're reading these truths, then expect to see evil work under the sun. Expect to see widespread oppression. Expect to see inconsolable victims of oppression. What did God give mankind when he gave us the earth? He gave us a beautiful garden with all the trees, and there was one tree in the middle, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said, hey, have whatever you want, just don't eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But enjoy it. It's beautiful. Harmony, peace, paradise, you have it all. Don't eat the tree or the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but Eve decided to, and Adam decided to eat that fruit. And what did they have in that moment? They had the knowledge, not just of good, but now it's the knowledge of evil. We were never intended to learn of the evils of Satan. We were never intended to have the knowledge of the evils of sin. You can be as harmonious and holy and perfect and pure as you think you can be, but guess what? You're still going to have the knowledge of evil things in this world, and that's heartbreaking. It's terrible. It's terrible. So, how does this declaration that the unborn is better than the living and the dead help us? Well, I believe it helps us in this regard. I believe it brings us a sense of gravity in life, an awareness of injustice, an awareness of oppression, tragedy, heartbreak, pain. It all is grieving. But there is a positive side. Ready? Positive side. The positive side is the more oppression you're aware of and you become conscious of, you tend to see more blessing in the good side of life. And by that I mean this. Knowing pain helps you appreciate comfort. Knowing sorrow helps you appreciate joy. Knowing death helps you appreciate life. Knowing loss helps you appreciate gain. Solomon was exposing the very dark side of this world, a world driven by sin. And if you stop and realize, you know what? Yeah. Better is the unborn than even the living and the dead, because they never have to deal with the pains of this world. This world is tough. This world's cruel. This world's sinful. This world's wicked. People get hurt and tragedies take place. And you make yourself aware of the dark side of this world so you can appreciate the bright things that God gives you. I have some friends, some family members, some friends in the community that I've talked to, and they don't like talking about bad things. Do you have any of those friends where you start to bring up, for example, a crime? Hey, did you hear about that terrible crime? I don't want to talk about it. I can't think about it. I'd rather not. Okay. So did you hear what happened, that tsunami? Man, hundreds have lost. I don't want to talk about it. It makes me feel sad. I don't want to deal with it. All right. Anybody run into people like that? They're trying so hard to convince themselves that life isn't brutal. And so I tease some of them when I get close to them. Oh, that's right. You're the princess fairy. You know, you like everything beautiful, and we color everything. Life stinks. Life is brutally difficult for many in this world. It's harsh. It's hard. It's cold. It's evil. It's sinful. If you don't grasp that, if you don't embrace that, if you don't accept that, you won't appreciate when you have a good day. I was sharing with the young couples Friday night. We were going around the room, and we were mentioning something we're all thankful for, and it got around to somebody, and somebody said, I'm thankful for when bad things happen because good things can come out of them. And it got to me. I was at the end, and truthfully, I was thinking about it recently, and I was sharing with the young people that were there that in ministry, and Pastor Phil and I often have these conversations, that life just really stinks. We have to, in the ministry, we have to be aware of people's hardships, and we have to be aware of broken marriages. We have to be aware of people who have lost loved ones for many years but are still grieving. In fact, the grieving process gets worse. And, you know, recently I told my wife, this world is ridiculous. Get me out of here. Because like my pastor told me, I would live my life with a broken heart, and indeed I do. Because I'm aware of many of your sufferings and many of the hardships that you bear on a daily basis. And my heart breaks for you. In fact, it was Thanksgiving night. I went home and I said, who would want to live here any more than they have to? Thanksgiving night, we're thankful. And I was thankful, but my heart broke for so many of you. Those of you who were crying because you lost your loved one. Those of you who are sharing testimonies because you lost a family member in a marriage dispute or a death. And you know what? Give me heaven like yesterday, right? Anyways, getting back to young couples, I feel a heartbrokenness perpetually, but there is an upside to that. Because I'm bearing brokenness for the people I love, it helps me grasp onto the positives, the blessings. In other words, when a baby's born in the congregation, I don't go to the hospital and hold that baby and say, you were better off in the womb. Like, I don't look at the parents and say, what did you do? You know, selfish. What shall we name them? Cursed. You know, we don't go and look at everything negatively. We celebrate those moments. Because ministry and length of days, as those of you who are elderly know this, when you bury young children, you appreciate when you can hold those young children. You see, the darkness of this world makes the sun shine brighter because it doesn't always shine. So when it's shining, thank God, because it doesn't shine a lot of days. So better is he that hasn't even been born. Just helps you to think what life would be without sin. And it gives you a better perspective. Verse number 4. We learn contentment is better than competition. He says some very interesting words through this chapter. He writes in verse 4, again, I considered all travail and every right work. I've looked at everything. Verse 4, again, I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Man oppresses one another, verses 1, 2, and 3, and man envies one another, verses 4, 5, and 6. And Solomon just shakes his head at the state of mankind, that we can oppress one another and that we can envy one another, even for doing every right work. Verse 5, the fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. What is that? Does anyone know what folding your hands together is? When Solomon says he foldeth his hand together, what does that mean? Sleeping. That's in Proverbs chapter 6. You had a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. All right, so he's referring to a fool who's envying his neighbor for the right thing. He says a fool will fold his hands, and then he says he eateth his own flesh. It's not a reference to chewing his fingernails. It's not a reference to cannibalism, but it means he folds his hands, he gets lazy, and self-destructs because of envy. Envy shuts you down. Envy captivates your mind. You just, I want to have that. I got to have that. And you just desire and do nothing about it. That's in Proverbs chapter 13. The soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing. Because you're thinking about it the whole time. You're wanting something the whole time, but you do nothing about it. That's what he's referring to here. Verse number 6, better is an handful, or better is one handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. Solomon has seen what envy does to a person. He's seen what happens to a person when you try to keep up with the Joneses. And he urged his son in the book of Proverbs to avoid envy at all cost, saying that it was the rottenness of the bones. Physical. That verse in Proverbs 14:30 says, a sound heart is the life of the flesh. A sound spiritual heart is the life of the physical flesh. Would you agree that your mindset, your attitude, your spiritual condition impacts your physical condition? Yeah, that's what he's saying. A sound heart is the life of the flesh. But envy, a spiritual problem in the heart, it's the rottenness of the bones. It'll actually ruin you physically. I absolutely believe that without question. He says, wrath is cruel, anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? Envy ruins lives. And to help his readers with the consequences of envy, Solomon points his readers to something better. He says, one handful with quietness, one handful with contentment, one handful with simplicity, one handful with rest, one handful with a life is better than two handfuls with stress, two handfuls with frustration, two handfuls with aggravation, two handfuls with disappointment. Contentment is better than keeping up with the Joneses. Envy will lead to the wrong pursuits, the wrong intentions, the wrong decisions, and the wrong goals. Solomon's saying, hey, rather than working 80 hours a week to keep up with the Jones and to have everything they have because you envy them, how about you work 40 hours and have a life to enjoy it? That's what he's saying. Rather than working excessive hours to get handfuls of stuff, why don't you just work a reasonable amount of hours to have one handful and have some life left over? He says, you can go ahead and succeed and stockpile all that cash for your retirement so everything's hunky-dory and you can have what everyone else has. But all that hard work, that obsession with having enough, you'll be so stressed for a lifetime, your heart will stop when you retire and you won't be able to enjoy it. Or you can work hard to get that convertible, have two jobs, or get the big job and get that convertible so you can drive it and have that top down and have the wind in your hair, but you'll work so long that your body will break down and you won't be able to even be in that convertible. You can work so hard to get your wardrobe so fashionable that you have the best of everything, you can show it off to the world, but you'll work so hard that your body won't even be able to put those things on. There's a better way. Choose contentment over competition. Verse number 7, the third thing is this: relationships are better than riches. Oh yeah, verse number 7. Then I returned. Let's look at those observations again. And I saw vanity under the sun. Here it is. That's vanity. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Nobody else. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor? And bereave or deprive or strip my soul of good. This is also vanity. Yea, it is a sore travail. This is a tragedy right here. This is the man or the woman who has made wealth their goal, occupation, their focus, career, their direction. They've chosen to be all alone. I'm going to make money. I'm going to do my thing. And they have no one to share that with. They have no spouse. They have no son. They have no daughter. They have no brother. They have no sister. They have no father. They have no mother. They have no friend. It's all me and my occupation. All me and my career. And they never stop and say, why am I doing this? For who am I working this hard for? Why am I stockpiling all this money? I'm not going to be able to share it with anybody. I'm not going to provide for anybody. I'm not even going to leave it to anybody. They never even ask that question. It's a tragedy. Verse number 9, Solomon says, two are better than one, because they, plural, have a good reward for their plural labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. This chapter all fits together. I'm going quickly now to get this done. Verses 1 through 3 talk about the gravity of life so that we can appreciate the joy of life. Verses 4 through 6 emphasize contentment so as to avoid the dangers of envy and covetousness. And here we get to these verses. Knowing life is tough, knowing life is difficult, and knowing envy will destroy you, he says don't allow riches to get in the way of relationships. You will need relationships. Why? Life is tough. Life gets cold. You'll need someone to warm you. Life is tough. You'll fail. You'll need someone to help you up. Life is tough. You'll have an oppressor. You need someone to stand by your side. And if you pursue money, if you pursue career, if you pursue occupation, you'll have nobody. And what a tragedy it is. What a tragedy it is. You know what I've written in my notes? Loneliness is a choice. Loneliness is a choice. You might be sitting there and saying, no, my husband left me, my wife left me. You might be saying, death took my husband, or death took my wife, or death took my child, or death took that person that meant the most to me. I am not in any way minimizing those tragedies. Death does take from us sometimes, in fact all the time, if we live long enough, our best of friends, our closest of companions. But unless you outlive everyone, and even if you outlive everyone, there's still a world of people that you and I can choose to call friends. Death doesn't take everyone from us. We choose to be alone. There are a lot of people who right now in their minds are saying, but I'm lonely, Pastor, and how dare you accuse me of being... We choose our relationships in this world. We don't choose who we lose. Death is cruel and does that for us. But we choose who's in our life and who's not in our life. Yeah, but you don't know. I was just talking to someone this morning. Been a busy day of counseling. Relationships are tough. They're difficult. But they're the most important thing in this world, and for some reason we put the least amount of effort into them. You can have all the money in the world. You can have all the health in the world. You can have all the security in the world. But if you have all that and have no one in your life, then your life will be miserable. Loneliness is the very reason God created two. We have to invest in people. We have to cherish people. I do not know why it's my job, unfortunately, to see this, but we throw relationships away like they're free. It amazes me. I mean biological relationships. I mean decades of relationships. I mean special bonds. We just, Two are better than one. Some people have fooled themselves into thinking they don't want to be around people because people are a pain, and yes, they are. But if you think loneliness will solve your social problems, I would beg you not to experiment with that. There's a reason when we punish people in prison, we put them in solitary confinement. Have you ever thought of that? The worst thing you can do to a human being because of our nature, our social design, is to isolate them permanently. People would rather die. We need people. We need relationships. We need help. We need support. We need one another. Amen? Ebenezer Scrooge, it's an important time of the year to point him out. He is the perfect picture of this passage, isn't he? Goes to work, works long hours, works very hard, comes home, counts his money, his house is drafty, goes to bed with no one. Gets up, goes to work, works hard hours, comes home, counts his money. No one likes him, and he likes no one. And he is a very lonely man. He is a very miserable man. He focused more on financial stability than on relationship stability. He focused more on having enough riches to live on instead of focusing on having enough relationships to live with. In a day and age that we're living in today, I wonder how many mothers have shortchanged their children for $10,000 more a year. How many fathers have shortchanged their sons for $20,000 more a year? How many people have chosen to make money instead of making friends? How many people have chosen to win a financial contention or argument instead of losing it in order to gain and keep a friend? Keep your pennies, lose your friends. Lose your pennies, keep your friends. Ty Cobb, Mr. Smaz, who's Ty Cobb? Baseball player. Detroit Tigers? Did he have a harsh demeanor? Alienated people? Before my time, so I don't know him really well. No. You know what he said? This is a pretty powerful statement. He said, if I had to do it over, I'd make more friends. If I had to do it over, I'd make more friends. God help us that that's what we say before we die. Money won't be there at your funeral. Your wealth, your career, your retirement accounts, your nest egg, they won't plan the end of your life. And so Solomon says in Proverbs 15:17, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. If you want to put it in today's terms, better is a dinner of vegetables where your family is very close than a steak meal every night without any relationships. Number 4, very quickly, and we'll be done, and I mean quickly because these verses are a little difficult to understand, so I'll pass over them so you can't question me. They are a little difficult to follow. Enlightenment is better than entitlement. Verse number 13, Solomon says, better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. This is Solomon's literary style. He would contrast. You have old and young, poor and rich, unknown and known, unpopular and popular, but you have wisdom and foolishness, and that's the ultimate thing. He's not pinning youth against age or wealth against poverty. He's not doing that. He's talking about the wisdom and the foolishness. In verse 14, he says, for out of prison he, referring to a poor wise child, out of prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom, that's the king, that's the old foolish king, becometh poor. So what you have here, and I know it may seem a little hard to follow, but he says a poor wise kid is better than an old and foolish king who will no longer be corrected, be admonished, because out of prison where this poor wise child is because his family owed debts, the family was cast into prison, this poor child who's wise, because wisdom is what makes you excel, because he's wise, even though he's poor and in prison, he will eventually rise to power. Where the young or the old foolish king who was born into royalty, who had everything, who had privilege, he will become poor. And that's the contrast. Do you know of a man in the Bible who was in prison but because of his wisdom excelled to be prime minister? Joseph. Yeah, he was in prison, but he was wise and he excelled to the top. There are great men throughout history, even in the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar, who were great, who were powerful, who were wealthy, but they fell to their face because of pride, because of foolishness, who would no longer be admonished. Verse number 16, or verse 15 rather. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with the second child that shall stand up in his stead. He's referring to the heir of the old foolish king, the second son. And in verse 16 he says, there is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him, referring to the heir. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirits. What he says there is the poor, wise child will rise to power, while the old foolish king will fall. His son, who is supposed to take over, the people won't rejoice him, the people won't want him, and the people will kick out the ruling family and take the poor wise kid who came out of prison. And what he is saying here is enlightenment or wisdom is better than entitlement. Wisdom is better than wealth. Entitlement or entitlement over here is not going to keep the throne. It's actually going to result in losing the throne. How many families rise to power because they have a wise leader, but over time that authority, that power, that luxury corrupts them and it steals from them what got them to power in the first place. Money distracts from wisdom. Power distracts from understanding. And over time, this family that once was wise become foolish. Wealthy rulers become foolish fathers. Foolish fathers produce foolish sons. Foolish sons lose the family power and ultimately the family luxury. Listen, there is a lot of tragic personal application of Solomon in what he just wrote. Because he who rose to power because of wisdom over time would become the wealthiest king in Israel. His son Rehoboam would miss it and would lose the kingdom to some degree. But there was a guy named Jeroboam who was very industrious, and he rose to power. And eventually the people kicked out Rehoboam from the northern tribes. Very sad state of matters here for Solomon. You say, what is he saying? Well, he's saying that this is what life under the sun consists of. Repeating cycles of tragedy. Over and over, lessons are not learned. Opportunity is wasted and privilege is lost. It's vain. He says, but there's a better way. There's a better approach to life, and it's getting wisdom. It's taking wisdom wherever you are. You may be in prison. You may be on the streets. You may be in a little hut. You may be in a little house, but get wisdom. It's better than foolishness. That's where you rise to power. That's where you rise to opportunity. Don't focus on privilege. Don't focus on luxury. Don't focus on entitlement. Don't focus on power. Don't focus on inheritance. Focus on getting wisdom, getting understanding, getting knowledge, getting prudence, getting all the skills and virtues that he taught his son to get. So chapter 4 is all about better things. And in a nutshell, life can be hard, but it can still be enjoyable. It can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be as bad as it is. If we choose that which is better, then life will be better than perhaps how it seems. And so Solomon would not have you focus on the vanity of life as much as he would on choosing the better things in life. Let's stand and have a word of prayer.